Well, if you are a regular listener of Game Time podcast, today you are going to notice that a certain Mr. Mihir Vasavda is not here. That is because he's made his way to Bhopal, where he's covering shooting trials for the Paris Olympics. But in his place, we have Shashank Nair here joining us on this week's Game Time podcast. Me, Amit Kamath, as usual, is here. And if you were listening, like just few days back, we were certain of what we wanted to, use as this week's episode. But then Shashank, this being Shashank Bhargava, our Game Time producer, he was not very happy with the audio quality, which is why we were left scrambling for another topic to talk about. And then, just as he has with the national team, Sunil Chhetri came to the rescue, announcing his retirement. So we couldn't have had a better topic to talk about this week than Sunil Chhetri, a person who's been, I don't know, how many years has it been? Has it been 19 years or so that he's been like a constant, a colossus in the Indian national colors? He's almost played for the Indian national team for 20 years now, which is no mean feat. And he's rescued the national team way too many times, and he's now rescued us as well. Now we have a topic to talk about. Joining me this week will be Shashank Nair, who works with the sports desk, writes on a multitude of issues, including shooting, basketball, and Indian football. Shashank, welcome to the pod. Your first reactions when you heard that Sunil was finally hanging up his boots for the national team?
Hey Amit, thanks for having me. So I think it was not that much of a surprise to me because I did hear rumors that, he would be planning on retiring. But the thing that I had heard was it would be after the World Cup qualifiers. So the fact that he's going to retire after the Kuwait game and not 5 days later after the Qatar game was, I think, the only bit of, so-called surprise that there was there. But other than that, it had been time where, you knew that the national team had to progress forward and there would be a time where, he would have to hang up his boots, at least at the national level. And so, yeah, that was there. But it's one of those situations, right, where even if you know it's coming, you're still a little shocked when it does happen. And it kind of felt like that to me because he's been at the helm for so long. I mean, I know we say 19 years, but just that's a lot of time. And he's been the captain since 2012. So that's 12 of those 19 years where he was a de facto spokesperson of Indian football. He was the most known face of Indian football. And it's kind of hard to let go of, someone like that or watch that person, say that, this is it, this is time. But it also opens up so many interesting possibilities for the future because now you're wondering what is life going to look like for Indian football after Sunil Chhetri? And that in itself opens up so many discussions and so many topics and so many possibilities.
Shashank, of all the things that you said, you spoke about, the possibilities that this opens up for the future. We'll get to the possibilities, for Sunil himself, for the Indian national team, for the Indian football ecosystem. All of that we'll get to in some time. But first, I wanted to talk to you about something else that you mentioned. You mentioned that, for these many years, he's not just been the captain, he's also been the face of, in a sense, he's been a poster boy for Indian football. He's been a de facto spokesperson for Indian football. I mean, we rarely have a figure like this where it's widely accepted that he's the most respected person probably in the ecosystem, because look at some of the things that he has done. And just away from the football pitch, for a minute, let's try and keep aside whatever he's done for, Indian football in terms of what he does on the pitch. But even away from that, when the pandemic was raging, he was one of those rare athletes the world over who basically handed over the keys to the door of his social media account and told journalists that, you can use my account to amplify pretty much whatever requests you want. If somebody needs oxygen in some part of the city, please reach out and Sunil Chhetri will RT it or tweet it from their handle on their behalf. And he has a significantly hefty followership. So he did that. Sometime in 2022, again, he had this moment where he started to realize that these living in a biosecure bubble was getting way too much for a couple of the younger players who didn't kind of have their bearings in place. Like mental health concerns were getting a slightly magnified. So what he does, he goes to social media, he decides to tweet about it and tell everybody, not just his own teammates, not just Indian football players. He tells all the other foreigners, experienced, inexperienced, rookies, veterans, everybody, whoever wants to have a Zoom call with me, talk about life in general, difficulties in general, I'm available. Just don't hesitate to reach out, drop me a DM, and I will be there. I am also sitting in my room pretty much doing not a whole lot, because back then the ISL was going on and they were all playing out of a biosecure bubble, which was getting on everybody's nerves in a sense. So he's done that. Shashank, I think, and one things that basically made Sunil like a proper household name and the spokesperson for Indian football was when he made an appeal to fans to turn up at the stadium. Can you just maybe talk about that and then also about the persona of Sunil Chhetri?
So I think it's a very interesting point that you have brought up, because I've been thinking about this, and this is more to do with Sunil Chhetri, the Bengaluru FC captain, because I feel like this was one of those things, one of these personality traits, characters of him that was just unlocked once he joined Bengaluru FC, a club that's, known for its outreach programs. It's known for doing stuff like this. And I think it was like a perfect fit because he had the stature in Indian football, and obviously then it was married to this club and the ethos of this club. And I think you got to see a lot of these things. But for me, honestly, that time in 2017, when the whole video that you're talking about, that happened, I think it exemplified what Sunil Chhetri really was. I mean, it was basically a game where not a lot of fans turned up to the Andheri Sports Complex, and India were playing. And it was one of those games that caught the eye of social media, because then what it started was with, the national team was playing over here and there weren't a lot of fans. And it prompted him to come out and basically request fans to come to watch the games. He basically asked in that video for fans to come and abuse them, be a part of their journey, cheer for them, but just come. And it was basically an appeal to fill out an 8,500-seater stadium. And it was caught, became viral. Like, I know Virat Kohli tweeted it out, and then it became really viral. And then after that, I think the next two games saw like capacity crowds fill out. But I think it was just that intensity that he had in that video where it meant so much to him. And it's very rare to see an Indian sportsperson come out like that and, let you or the casual fan know that this really means a lot. This means something. And it hits you so much so that, you fill out stands, you actually go to see what he's about. I think that's one of the things you're going to see, the impact of Sunil Chhetri, you're going to see on June 6th, when at the Salt Lake City Stadium, a huge stadium, 60,000 plus seater stadium, you're going to see fans just fill out. Like, it's going to be like a celebration of his career. And I think it's well deserved because, there have been times where he has played out in empty stadiums for India as the national team captain. And there have been times where, it almost feels like he deserves this kind of a farewell. He deserves a win against Kuwait as his final game. He deserves that 60,000 fan, all of those fans coming out in Calcutta, the place where, his career de facto started. It would be a great spectacle, but it would also be a celebration of who he has become, especially, with Bengaluru, where he was, this part of his identity was allowed to flourish. And like the whole captain side of his, the captain away from the field part of his personality was really allowed to, grow. And I guess we are going to be able to celebrate that on June 6th now.
And Shashank, what I found really interesting was once he had made the announcement itself was a very raw video of him, talking about how he had decided and why he had decided. Like the inner child inside him always wanted to keep on playing, but then the mature adult at some stage took precedence over it and told him that, I think you need to stop at this point because others also need to get chances. If you are going to take up the mantle the whole time, their chances get restricted. A whole rebuild of the position kind of gets affected because of that, things like that. But one day after that very raw announcement that he made, he also came for a virtual press conference where I think some 60 odd journalists had turned up. And I believe after 1 hour of answering questions, there were some 60 odd questions still unanswered that the host just had to say that, sorry, we can't answer that many questions. He's given us 1 hour of time. We've already extended it for 1 hour, 15 minutes. And I mean, that's enough. And then at some point, Sunil also informed us that, he's gotten 688 missed calls on his phone since the time he's kind of announced his retirement. And Shashank, as you mentioned that, that appeal that he made on that video that went viral, it caught the eyes of pretty much a lot of people who ordinarily may not follow football or ordinarily may not concern themselves too much with, Indian football as such. I know a couple of people who yesterday on their social media accounts, I saw them sharing the video of Sunil and writing at some point that, not like we follow Indian football a whole lot, but I only got to know what Sunil Chhetri is after that viral video. So clearly, I mean, he's a man who's made an impact, but segueing from his impact off the field, he was a man who always knew when to turn up at the right moments and score goals when India most needed.
Yeah, his goal scoring obviously was, I mean, more than the goal scoring, it was how he set himself up for those goals, I feel. Because you have to remember, Chetri is the successor to Baichung Bhutia. And Baichung Bhutia was always known to be the striker that was, he was that end product guy. He would finish, like, if a move was started by other Indian players, he would be the guy at the end of it who would score with his first touch, or maybe, hold on the ball and score again, or maybe a header. Chetri was more. I think Chetri was more of a player who could also link up play. He was one of those guys who would like to come deep into the midfield part and, start to chase balls. Even right now, like in this last year in 2023, when India were doing so well and results domestically were doing so good, one of the aspects that I loved watching personally was a 38-year-old Sunil Chhetri chasing after balls, chasing after defenders, making sure that, he would be the first line of defense for India. It was so good to watch because, again, it ties into one of his own ethos, which is just this crazy discipline and this crazy attention to his own body. Like, his fitness levels are so good and they always have remained so good. Like, I remember a lot of these players who now are like, in the middle of their careers for the national team. Players like Anirudh Thapa, who have a considerable number of national games. When they started their careers out, when their first few national games would happen, they would talk about how Sunil Chhetri would be the guy who would come up to them and tell them what to eat. He would be the guy who would tell them, you're undersized, so you can't be pushed off the ball, so you need to train for that. And then in training, he would start the moment an Anirudh Thapa would get the ball. There'd be Sunil Chhetri right next to him, trying to push him off it. Not because, that was the way he wanted to play or something, but just because he knew there would be players from other teams who would try to push him off the ball, and therefore this guy had to learn. And that's just how it is. Like, even his striking, for example, it was, I think, something that was built from necessity. I think he realized that India needed a striker that would come deep, that would be able to hold the ball, that he would be able to pass the ball about. Like, he had to learn how to play with his back to goal. And that is something not a lot of... I don't think there's a single Indian striker right now who can do that. And it's a tough ask to do in our society, in our football society. Like, our grassroots don't necessarily impart that kind of knowledge on a young player. And Chhetri, I don't think, had that kind of know-how in the start of his career. It was something that he had to learn. And I think it was like a very lonely journey in that way. His striking journey, his journey to become a striker has had those moments, where this idea that he's a rung or two rungs above the rest of the Indian national team, it isn't like God-given talent. It's basically stuff that he has had to work on, stuff that he knew he had to do to get better. Like some of his first touches through the latter half of his career, where, a ball would be pinged into him and he'd just take one touch and kill the ball and score. Like, these kind of things didn't come really naturally to him. He had to learn it and he worked so hard at it, and it started to show really how well, he devised his time in training, because in his 30s, like especially once he crossed 30, he became such a good striker. He became like a very good all-round player. And I think that really, is something that has to be admired about him. He could have easily rested on his laurels. So many Indian strikers after 30, so many Indian players after 30, their development kind of stops. And he just kept on, going up this ladder, and he just didn't stop, trying to learn and get better. And that's, again, there are so many wholesome aspects of his personality, and there are so many wholesome aspects of him as a footballer as well. And this is, I feel, one of those things.
Shashank, he was in a sense a culture setter as well. If you have somebody who's, played for 15 years for the national team, is the captain, is the face, is the spokesperson, and he's basically out training you in every training session that you go to, then you will, as a upstart, you will obviously want to pull up your socks in a sense. So he was kind of maybe that figure as well. But I think we should also kind of move on to now the question of, now that Sunil Chhetri has decided to leave, what next after Sunil Chhetri? And I think the answers that we have there is kind of bleak in a sense, right, Shashank?
So it's quite bleak, yes. I mean, the way things work right now, it's quite unfortunate. But the thing is, right, like the Indian Super League has done some great things for Indian football. It's by and large one of the biggest impacts that the Indian Super League has had is this increase in salary for domestic players. Like football is a genuine money making occupation for a sports person in India, and that is purely down to the Indian Super League. Now, but the biggest issue over it is that as a business, the clubs often employ foreign players in the spine positions. The spine positions are your central striker, your central midfielder, and your two centre backs or three centre backs, however you like to play. And I think that is that one area where India really, really struggles, especially over these last few years, because even if you have players who are coming in from the grassroots, even if you have under 17 players who are now ready to take the next step, or under 23 players who are maybe just a lot of games away from becoming their true selves, that whole scenario never really realizes itself, because a lot of these players simply don't get the opportunities that they should be getting. That, unfortunately, is the reality of the top level of the Indian football ecosystem right now. And it's slowly changing in the sense that over the last few years, a lot more central defenders and a lot more central midfielders are being employed by Indian Super League clubs. And they get regular game time and they're starting to get better. Like Apuya Ralte, for example, is one of those midfielders who has really benefited from a club properly investing time in him and properly allowing him the space to play and the game time through the I-League season. And has also employed him like competitions like the Asian Champions League, which is many rungs in quality above the Indian Super League. And therefore lets, Indian players have an idea of where they stand, at least on the Asian level. Now, striking, unfortunately, the striker department is one of those roles where that simply has not translated. I think this season alone, I was looking at some striker options that the Indian national coach Igor Stimac likes to usually take with him. Manveer Singh and Ishan Pandita both have had very minimal roles in their teams as a striker. I think Manveer Singh had just not even 90 minutes, I think, combined through the season, where he played as a striker. He was mostly used in the right wing and then in the right back position also on some occasions. Ishan Pandita was mostly used as a substitute and would come at the fag end of games when, either a goal was needed or, they were losing quite badly. And that, again, it simply can't aid to the development of a striker. You need to give your strikers game time. You need to make sure that, from the youngest age group to the topmost level that they can play at, they constantly are getting game time. They're constantly being fed like a lot of service and they're able to score those goals. But that position, that opportunity that Indian striker should ideally have, it's going to a foreign striker as of now. So unless that little thing changes, it's very hard. And it's quite bleak right now because just in the immediate scenario of how Indian football is, it's quite tough to look at any of the striking options we have and think that, there are goals over here for them. Because it's tough to envisage them playing for even at the club level. Unless that changes, you can't even make up your mind over whether they can be good at the Indian level. So that is unfortunately one of those bleak things, but it's something that Indian football absolutely needs to fix. All ISL clubs need to play Indian strikers and those Indian strikers need to it has to happen. There is no other way around.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that Sunil was asked yesterday by journalists is, what would you tell ISL clubs or maybe ISL management about how to fix this issue? And I think he was very upfront about the issues. And I think he also kind of recognizes that despite whatever stature he has, he can't really walk up to a management of a club and tell them that, you have to forcibly play only an Indian player. So what he did was he basically told the other footballers, the Indian footballers, the younger ones who are coming up, that, you need to look at these foreigners as your competition, and then you need to figure out a way to step up. There are no free meals in this business, especially when a franchise has put in so much money into running a football club. So why do you expect a free handout, in a sense where they tell you that, okay, fine, because you are Indian and because the Indian team is trying to get a striker in place of Sunil Chhetri, so we will play you for whatever, 5 games of the season or 7 games of the season. So that's never going to happen. So maybe the more practical thing is that the player themselves try and figure out a way of getting, upskilling in a sense. So he said that, but because we don't like to end the podcast on gloomy notes, I think Sunil was also very cheekily asked if he was planning to become a coach of the national team or any other team once he retires. So the question of what after he retires from the Indian football team came up. He was very politely asked if he would like to join the national team as a coach at some point. And he very, very forthrightly said that, mental peace bhi koi cheez hoti hai. And he does not really want to get into all of that right now. He'd probably consider working and getting his coaching batches. But then coaching is something that is not on the horizon at the moment for him. Yeah, I mean, it would be a great dream, right? To have somebody like a Sunil Chhetri as a mentor or a coach at some point, but then obviously he's still playing for Bengaluru. It's not as if he's retired completely. Shashank, any parting thoughts, maybe in a slightly happier note about Indian football?
See, I think on one hand, you can sit and say that, okay, this is not a really good look for Indian football where your best player over 20 years has basically decided to hang up his boots. And now, despite the last 20 years, there aren't a lot of viable options. But the good thing to look about it is if you are a young Indian striker right now, and there are plenty of them, you are looking at this spot going, okay, there is now chances over here to be, the next Chhetri, the next Bhutia, the next Vijayan. Those spots are open. Now there's going to be this merry-go-round of players. You're going to want to see whether they live up to these exceptionally large boots of these exceptionally tiny men. You're going to see a lot of that. And it's good also because there are going to be these situations where clubs are also going to find that there are a lot of younger players coming up who are suddenly trying to play levels above what they are. And that will be because they know that at the national level, there is a dearth of strikers. You know that now. And that I feel is a good thing too, because it is one area where, it almost feels like because there was a sure name at the top of the field, competition had almost dulled down. And it now feels like because that spot is open, there are striker spots open for the national team, you will see a lot more I-League clubs, especially I feel like strikers playing for I-League clubs who are predominantly Indian will hopefully see this as an opportunity to find a way to, play well enough to get in the good books of Mr. Stimatch. And I think that is one of those things. I think ISL clubs by themselves also could, it's a matter of opportunity at the end of the day. You've got to give time to younger strikers and younger players to grow. And I think ISL clubs as a whole do tend to do that when they find talent. Again, I take the example of Apoya Ralte. Ralte was quite young when Northeast United FC started playing him. And then when Mumbai saw who he was, they have aided his development quite a bit. And they've done multiple things to make sure that he becomes the best possible midfielder that he can be. I think the same rules will come with a striker as well, especially now. So that's something to look forward to. You might not get the results that you want with Indian football, but you will know that, there's a good competition going on in the background, and you'll want to watch the league now knowing full well that, there are Indian players who are vying to be a part of the national team. And I think that's a positive thing, it's required. The competition in that area is a heavily required thing. So you're going to see a lot more competition, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Shashank. We can end this conversation on a note from Sunil Chhetri himself. Yesterday, after his press conference had gotten over, he made a very humble request to fans, journalists, pretty much everybody. He said that he was one of those players in the Indian football team who had received probably the most love over the last 1 or 2 decades from Indian fans. And his request was basically for fans and journalists and pretty much everybody who has a stake in Indian football to kind of show the same love for everyone who comes beyond or after him in the Indian setup. And that's a very heartwarming sentiment to end this podcast on. Thank you to both the Shashanks, Shashank Bhargava, our producer, Shashank Nair, our co-host in a sense today, for talking about Sunil. And through this podcast, we also thank Sunil Chhetri for everything that he's done and everything he's about to do in the future for Indian football. This is me, Amit Kamath, signing off. Do tune in next week. Hopefully, Mihir Vasavda will be back to anchor the show. Till then, happy listening. Goodbye.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.